Like Natalie said, my name is Justis Tenpenny, and I just wanted to start by thanking Natalie and for all of you for having me here today. I told my husband that I wanted to open today with a joke because laughter can help break the ice, and it's proven that it can relieve anxiety in speakers, which I'm feeling a little bit of right now. Um, it turns out, though, that I'm not actually that funny, and my husband told me to stick to what I know. Which, that's the easy part, right? I'm here to talk about my experiences, my work, and who knows my story better than I do. So, if you're willing, I'm going to take you on a little journey today. Began way back in Milwaukee on the day that I was born. Just kidding, I'm not going to go that far back. So, I told my husband I was funny. In all seriousness, yes, I was born and raised in Milwaukee, but my story starts a little bit after when I was born. I knew that I was gay when I was in the fifth grade. I was only 11 years old. And you might think that seems pretty young. But as it turns out, it was actually pretty average. So, according to the Pew Research Center, in a survey of LGBTQ Americans, 38% of gay male respondents said that they felt that they weren't straight before the age of 10. 46% said that they knew they weren't straight between the ages of 10 and 14. So there I was, 11 years old and gay. But at that age, I didn't really have the vocabulary to define how I felt. All I knew is that I was different. All the other boys liked girls. No characters in any movie, TV show, or book that I had ever came in contact with were like me. The thing about being different is that other children can sense it. They inherently know that you aren't like them and they treat you differently. During those years of my life, I got really good at hiding how I felt. I thought that I was the only person in the entire world who was going through what I was going through. I developed a great love for reading. Only now do I know that this was a coping mechanism, because burying myself in books was easier than facing what I was. I learned really young that feeling different runs parallel to feeling alone. When I was 13, I came out to someone for the first time. I had known this friend since kindergarten. I remember the day very vividly. We were sitting on the concrete steps of the brick duplex that she lived in. I was picking at the bush that had overgrown past the railings, and I was nervously trying to work up the courage. Finally, I spat out, "I like boys." It was the first vocal declaration I had ever made about my sexuality. She stood up, looked me in the eyes, told me that she thought I was disgusting, and we never talked again. I would go another 3 years before I told anyone else about my sexuality. In high school, when I was 15, I began to seriously struggle with my mental health. There was an openly gay classmate that I had in high school. I remember seeing what the other teens did to him and thinking, this is what my life is going to be like. Every day I would hope and wish and pray that I could just be straight. Every night for a long time, I cried myself to sleep. I thought that I was never going to have friends who understood me or have that great storybook love that I was always reading about. Teenage angst mixed with being queer is not a great combination. While my peers were busy being kids, I was wrestling with pain and self-loathing and other feelings that no one, regardless of age, should ever have to face. And that was the spark for me. No one should have to go through this. It was the next summer, at the age of 16, that I made myself a promise. I was going to dedicate myself to making sure that no one ever felt the way that I did. I promised myself to never be silent. I was going to go to college, get a degree, and this was going to be my life's work. But before I get into that, the summer was memorable for another reason. I decided that I was going to come out to my mother. So one night, I gathered the courage and I went into my mother's room. It was well after midnight when I sat on the edge of her bed, woke her up, and sitting there in the dark, was prepared to say the words. But when I opened my mouth, I just started to cry. It's a theme through this entire thing. So we sat there like that in the dark, me on the edge of her bed, while I'm crying my eyes out for what felt like 30 minutes. Once I eventually stopped crying, I came out to my mother. She told me that she loved me, but immediately followed it up by saying, "Don't tell anyone else." It could have been worse, but it could have been better. It was 3 years before we talked about my sexuality again. In Milwaukee, I grew a deep-seated hatred for myself. I felt disgusting, and I felt destroyed. But in Green Bay, I'd blossom. Moving to Green Bay and starting college was the start of my work to fulfill that promise that I had made to myself. At 18 years old, I became the social media manager for Northeastern Wisconsin Pride. And that was also the same year that I went to my first ever Pride event here around the corner at Joannes Park. I remember thinking to myself, I have never seen so many queer people in the same place before. Boy, did I have a lot to learn. When I was 20, I took Political Science 101 as a general education credit. During this class, the professor had dedicated 5 minutes to talking about LGBTQ plus history. Yes, it is really annoying that in an entire semester, only 5 minutes was given to queer history, but that changed my life. It was the first time that I had ever heard of the Stonewall riots. Up to that point in my life, I thought that gay rights began and ended with marriage equality. I went back to my dorm room and started Googling LGBTQ plus history. I read and read and read. I learned about the Lavender witch hunts, law enforcement beatings and entrapments, the HIV/AIDS epidemic, the Stonewall riots, the Compton cafeteria riots, Harvey Milk, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, Matthew Shepard, the Gay Liberation Front, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. My head was absolutely spinning. And then I dove into some contemporary LGBTQ issues. And here are some of the things that I learned. LGBTQ people have drastically higher rates of mental illness. LGBTQ people are more likely to engage in risky behaviors like drug use, unsafe sex, smoking, and drinking. It's estimated that up to 40% of homeless youth in America are LGBTQ. And on average, an LGBTQ American between the ages of 13 and 24 attempts suicide every 45 seconds. I was furious. So I set out to do what I do best, talk. From there grew some really incredible projects. I helped establish the first Rainbow Club in Green Bay area public schools at Howe Elementary, a club that would give a warm, welcoming, and affirming space to LGBTQ 4th and 5th graders, something that I really could have used when I was in school. In 2019, I began working with the University of Green Bay Archives and Area Research Center to create a Northeastern Wisconsin LGBTQ historical archives. It's a very long sentence. It began with me searching through attics, basements, storage lockers, and talking to lots of people. I was encouraging them to tell their stories and record oral histories and donate objects of relevance to LGBTQ history. A little over 4 years later, the items that used to be sprawled out on my living room floor, much to the dismay of my husband, are now on display at the Neville Public Museum in a new exhibit called Telling Our Stories. In 2021, I was asked to join the planning committee for the LGBTQ plus mural that is now on the side of Napoli's Lounge and Grill. The project grew into nothing short of a monumental moment for our community. Later that year, I began working on a new idea, the 9-week LGBTQ plus equity challenge, which aimed to educate individuals who signed up for the challenge on 9 different topics related to the LGBTQ plus community. These topics ranged from terminology, history, and other contemporary issues. I remember being on vacation, an adult beverage glistening in the sun next to me, and my fingers furiously typing away on my laptop. My mom pleaded with me to stop working just for one day, but I couldn't because no vacation can give me the feeling that having a positive impact on the queer community can. The 9-week LGBTQ plus equity challenge was taken by thousands of individuals spanning 12 different states. That same year, at 26 years old, I became the vice president of Northeastern Wisconsin Pride. I received my first award for my advocacy work, the Ethics in Action Award. In 2023, I received the Future 15 Award and was the first ever recipient of the Lavender Leadership Award from the UW Green Bay Pride Center. Now, believe it or not, this is the abridged version of the first 27 years of my life. But why tell you all that? Don't get me wrong, I love talking about these things, and I love sharing my story. And just a little part of me loves to talk about all the hardware that I've won. But why? Why force you to sit through the life story of a queer man that you knew nothing about when you walked through the door this morning? My story isn't unique, but therein lies the key. My story is not unique. The pain, the struggle, it's far too common. And so often, it ends much worse than my own story. There's a chance that someone in your life, now or in the future, can benefit from you having heard this story. It could be a family member, a friend, a coworker, or someone you just randomly meet one day. It could be a child, a young adult, or someone who's much older than you. I once met a friend's brother who was 54 and he had just finally come out to the world. I've met people in their 70s who are only out on the weekends. Our journeys as queer individuals are not defined by our ages. So I want you to be ready for when you meet that person. I'm not going to tell you anything complicated. In fact, this isn't something that you don't already know. And the context clues have been scattered throughout my story. So just for a second, I want you to look inside of yourself and think about a time in your life when you were struggling. Maybe you were going through a tough financial situation, or heartbreak, or lost your job. What is the most basic thing that somebody could have done for you? The answer is simple. Show up. Let me repeat that, because a life could seriously depend on it. Show up. Whether it's for a friend who needs a listening ear, or an event, an exhibit opening, pride, or just someone who needs you, there are a million different ways that you can do it. Just show up. It's basic. It's easy. It requires a little bit of energy, but just show up. For the individual, it could mean the world. Listen with your heart, be there. And for the queer community, showing up to our events signals to us that people care about us. Because often, the hatred aimed at our community is much louder than the love. Maybe you will leave here today feeling extra inspired, and you think, but Justice, I want to do more. I don't just want to wait to show up when I'm needed, I want more. And to that I say, no matter the skills you have, and no matter what stage of life you are at, we need you. I've talked to individuals before that say, well, I'm an accountant and I have a math degree. How could I possibly help? Girl, finances are complicated and I hate math. Please have a seat at the table, right? I'm not trying to do all that. Each and every one of the people sitting here today has a set of skills that can propel any sort of advocacy work forward. Don't ever sell the impact that you can make short. All I've ever done is talk, and this is where I'm at. Education is also very important, historical or contemporary. I challenge you to learn more about the queer community or other issues that are close to your heart. Because I'll tell you what, no matter how you decide to show up, we need you. Over 75 years ago, the idea that LGBTQ people were dangerous or preying on children was introduced to America. And yet, just yesterday, I attended an all-ages drag show in Sheboygan. The business for weeks has been getting threatening calls. Individuals left voicemails saying things like Hitler was right. Faggots dressed as women raping children deserve consequences. This will not go unpunished, and other outlandish statements. Law enforcement across our country continues not to take these threats seriously. At Pride this year at the Brown County Fairgrounds, 2 different groups showed up to protest. One group wore "Stab Your Local Pedophile" t-shirts. These groups attacked our sponsors for supporting grooming and pedophilia, which led to a lot of them dropping out. Last year, neo-Nazis in full body armor, with their faces covered and swastika armbands, showed up to a Pride event in Watertown, Wisconsin, armed with assault rifles. Across the nation, hundreds of anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced into state legislatures last year. Over the last few years, we've seen parents told that they're abusing their children for affirming them. We've seen doctors and hospitals receive death threats. We've seen the gunmen at the Pulse nightclub and Club Q shootings be called heroes. We've seen venues firebombed because they're hosting a drag show. Schools receiving bomb threats for wanting to talk about pronouns, erasure of queer culture from history, book bannings, and religious leaders, and yes, even politicians calling for the public execution of LGBTQ people just for existing. The list goes on and on. Violence against the queer community continues, and it is emboldened by all of our silence. And we should never be silent in the face of suffering. And you may be thinking right now, but it's better than it was before. I'm going to be honest with you. I hate when people say that, because it is better than what it was before. But are you willing to bet your life on that? A few weeks ago, that business in Sheboygan was hosting a separate event, and they were worried that some of these callers were going to show up. I knew more than anything that I needed to be there. So I asked some friends and peers if they wanted to go with me to support the drag performers and business owner. One by one, my people explained to me that they were really sorry, but they had this or that going on, and they weren't going to be able to go. While other queer people were afraid, when all they needed was somebody to show up, they couldn't be bothered. It hurt, but I'm used to it. Then I accidentally broke my own heart. While I was expressing my feelings to a dear friend, I said, "No one told me that activism would be so lonely." But it shouldn't be that way. And that's why showing up, something so simple, is so important. It's also important to note that after my self-inflicted hurt feelings, 2 of my best friends and husband did make the drive to Sheboygan with me, so might have guilted them into it a little bit. This work isn't easy. I work a full-time job, and I do all of this on my free time. I'm telling you, truly, that all I want to do is love my husband, see my friends, read great books, laugh, and enjoy the short life that I've been given. But I promised myself that I would never again be silent, that I would dedicate myself to making sure that no one ever felt the way that I did when I was growing up. But the good news is that I'm not asking you to do all that. But I am going to challenge you. So here's what I want you to do. Find an issue, something that has deep meaning to you and that is close to your heart. I know that not everyone is going to share my passion for the queer community, but we all have things that we care deeply about. Could be related to animals, the environment, or housing, or really anything. Just find something that matters to you and show up. Educate yourself, lead initiatives, support other people's projects, attend events, loan your skills, your time, your energy. I challenge all of you to make our community a better place. And one thing that I've learned is that you can never underestimate the impact that you can have. Even if you make one person's life better, you should be proud. A final thought that I want to leave with you is something that I recently read. It says, good is not a thing that you are, it is a thing that you do. So let's do good. Let's show up. Let's make a difference. Thank you.